Welcome CSC230 W1 to ex8 Jumbotron Responsive, and we're basically going to use our ex7 exercise, our same folder, and all we're going to do is add code, mainly CSS code, to make our page responsive. And we're going to have two breakpoints, and I'll just show these right now. I'm just going to move this over and start resizing the page. And what's going to happen after we get to a certain point, two things are going to happen. One, the navigation is going to go underneath here. Now, we're not doing anything with the hamburger menu or drop-down menu yet. We're just moving our navigation underneath the company name. That's all that's happening, and I think it's like 800 or something. We'll double-check the width, and then a little bit more, I think it's going to be like 700. We're going to break the three columns that were in three columns into three rows, and we might have to put a little space after the buttons, but that's it. We're just going to move our navigation here, and we're going to move our columns here. Now that's going to involve changing our flex. So that's what we're going to do for ex8. Not a whole lot. We'll try to make this quick, and let's get started. All right, so you're going to go into Replit, and you're going to go to your CSC230 W1 Repel and your ex7 folder that you've been working on with the Jumbotron. And I'll just open up index right now. And remember, you have your main file showing up here, so you could bring this out and open it in a new tab and just click on ex7. You don't have to make an ex8 for this. ex8 will just be the responsiveness part of it, but we'll keep this open here so you can see what's going to happen. And another thing, I have this tab open. Make sure you have W3 Schools open, go to CSS, and we're going to check out CSS Responsive. And that's where they'll have media queries that we'll look at. And I'd recommend going through all these, because we've kind of done responsive just by looking at it. You understand what's happening, but please read through every one of these. Read through the intro. It's not a lot of reading to go through, but go through these and look at the samples. Look at the viewport, look at the grid view, and media queries, images, videos, frameworks, all that kind of stuff. Check it out. We're not going to get to all of it, but I want you to be familiar with it. So media queries is kind of the one we're going to look at most, because we're going to make a media query. Now, before we make a media query, let's see when we need it. And we can't see the distance right now, so I'm going to right-click and do inspect. And then when you start resizing it, I'm in Chrome right now, you should be able to see the size up there when you start resizing it. Now, I'm going to move this down because I don't really need to look at anything down there. I only need to look at my page. So I'm getting close now where this navigation is getting close to company name. So I'm getting really close. And it's at like 826. It gets to around 800 and it breaks. And it doesn't quite break yet, only the company name breaks. I don't want company name to break, I want this to break on another line. So I think around 800, we're gonna have this whole navigation area break. And that means it'll no longer be flex on a single row. Although when you use it, you call it column. It's kind of backwards the way they do it. And down here, I don't know if I want to put it in a single column yet. I think what we're going to do here is wait till we get a little further. Now I'm looking down here. I'm not looking up here, so look down here. And maybe right about here, that's about 620 or so, 640. Maybe at about 640, I'd want to break it. Because these columns, if you look at these, they're pretty narrow. Some of these are only getting a word or two. So I wouldn't want to go any narrower than that. So right now I'm at about somewhere between 630 and 640. Let's just say 640, and we'll break it. So we'll break it at 640, and we'll break it at 800. That means we're going to break the nav at 800, and we're going to break the columns at 640. So if we break the flex, right now we have a single flex class that's working for both of those, but we're going to have to make a separate one. So let's go back to our index, and I'm going to move this over because I don't really need to see that anymore. So I'll kind of collapse that. And let's just take a look at this. We have container, flex. So two things. We have container and flex. Now, if we look at our styles, flex is the one. If we go up here and find flex, and flex is up with our main ones because it kind of covers everything. So we have a container, that's all the containers, and we have flex. And all that it does is it just says display flex, and it has a gap of 2em. Meaning it's putting space in between. So we couldn't even adjust that with the top part, but that's the flex. Now, what has flex applied to it? Container has flex applied to it. Those are the columns. And nav has container and flex applied to them. So they'd work exactly the same way. So if we made a media query to change one of them, they would change both. Unless we did flex inside nav one way and flex inside the other another way. Let's see if we could do that. I don't know if we can do it, but we'll try it out. So let's start looking at media queries. Let's go and look at media queries, and we're going to use max width so that if it's anything smaller, it's always the opposite. So if it's anything smaller. So we're going to go down to media queries, and they have a whole bunch listed here, and I'll just use this one. It says, and this has a kind of a comment here which helps us out. It says, if the screen size is 600 pixels wide or less, hide the element. Now, we're not going to hide the element, but that's what's going to happen here. This query is going to take over. So I'm going to just copy this, and I could close this up. I don't need that inspect open. And what I'll do is I'll go into styles, and I'll go at the very bottom. Normally you'd put some kind of comment here, but there was one built in. So we'll just leave this here. We won't say hide the element. I'll get rid of that. And I'll just put some dashes here. And the first one's going to be 800. So I'll change this to 800. Now that doesn't mean anything. It's just a comment. And I'm going to change this to 800. That will mean something. Now this style in here, we can get rid of. This declaration, the one inside here. Remember, everything has to go inside these curly braces. So we're going to put separate ones in here. And I'll go to nav and find that flex. So here's our flex. We have a flex here. Now let's see how this works. I'm going to try to do this with the same one. Then if not, we'll just copy this and make a regular flex and a nav flex. This part is just for the nav. So let's go in here and see if this works. I didn't even try this, so we'll see what happens. I'll paste it in here. And again, I'm going to tab over. I'll tab these over just so everything is easy to see. I'll tab this curly brace over, and I'll remove that space. So that's the way it should look. You should have your opening and closing curly braces for the whole media query, and then opening and closing for each style. Now we're going to do one for nav flex and see how that works. See if we could do that. And what's going to happen to nav flex is when we get to a certain point, which is going to be 800, we want it to no longer be flexed. So they don't have just like a no flex. When you go into flex, now that's under advanced. Let's go to CSS Advanced, and they have Flexbox, and they actually have Flexbox Responsive. And basically what happens, if you just look at this, they just change the flex direction. You can't turn it off. You know, it's not like you say float none. You basically just say flex direction column, because initially it's row. Even though you don't have to put in row, it kind of puts everything on a row. I know it's confusing, but column is the one that's actually going to make it stack on each other, if that makes any sense. Because initially it's going across as a row. Now you're kind of putting them on top of each other. It kind of doesn't make sense, but we're going to change it to column. So this is what we're going to use to make flex kind of go away. We're going to choose flex direction column. So I'm going to copy that, or you could just start typing it in here. It's no longer going to be display, so you can even wipe this out and do flex direction. That should come up right away, even if you started typing it flex direction. And I'll just start typing column, and I'll do that. Now, there's a gap 2M. Remember, that's the gap in between. We could probably just get rid of that because we don't need a gap anymore, so I'll just put 0 there so there's no gap. I don't know if we need that or not, but let's just put 0 to wipe that out. So let's see if this works first. What that should do is it should wipe out the flex for that one. Now, that's if we can do this, if we could do the nav inside of flex. Now, let's just make sure. Now, we're saying nav, so we're saying inside the nav element. Now, you have to be careful because the container is actually the parent element. It's actually this div class container flex is actually the parent of it. So I'm not sure if this is going to work, but let's see if this works. I'm not sure if this is going to work in our styles, so I'll try it out. See if it doesn't work, fine, we'll try something else. Let's see if this works. This should be the flex class inside of nav. And it should be saying that flex class should have flex direction of column and a gap of 0. So I'll hit run here, and I'll refresh this. And let's see what happens. And we should get to around 800, and this should jump. And actually, that works. And if I go all the way over, a couple things. We need a little space above. So it's a little too tight there. And we also have this space on this side. So that actually worked. That's not the way I had practiced it, but that works, so that's even easier. And we have space here, and we need space above. So how do we fix that? Well, where's that space coming from? Where is that space coming from? Actually, where that space is coming from, we have to find where it's coming from. So I'm going to move this back. Well, yeah, I have to move it back because I'm going to look at my code on my regular screen. So where's that space coming from? Remember, they're the line items. So let's go up and look at our line items that are inside a nav. Here they are. Here's the nav menu line items, and they're display inline block, and each one is padding left 2M. So that's where that's coming from. That means each line item has padding left of 2M. So that means we still want to keep the 2M padding left because this is the 2M padding left. Padding left, padding left, padding left. We just don't want it here. How do we get rid of it for the first one? And we can actually do something called first child. And we're going to target that first child and just take away that padding left. So let's go look at this again, and we can just highlight this. We can highlight this, copy it, and I'm going to go down into my query, and I'll put a second declaration, and this is for nav menu li, and I'll tab these over. Now I'm going to change these because it's still going to be inline block, so if that's not changing, I don't need it. So I can get rid of it. So get rid of anything that's not changing. Color white is not changing, so I'll get rid of that. And this is changing, padding left. But remember, if we took away padding left, it would make it padding left 0 to all of them. Let me just show you. If I did this, nav menu li, padding left, and it's only when it gets smaller, let's see what happens. And let me tab this over so everything looks nice there. And I'll refresh it. And you can see what's happening. It's taking away all the space there. Now it's not even going over. So what's causing that stuff? We have to find out what's causing that stuff. And let's go back and look at our nav menu again. So we can't do that, but what we can do is we can do the first child. So we'll get to that in a minute, but there's also the issue that it's not aligning left. And do you remember how we aligned it right? You probably don't remember how we aligned it right, but the way we aligned it right is we did this. We did margin left auto, and that means we put auto space, auto margin to the left of nav menu. Now it's still there. We want to make it margin left 0. So let's do this. Let's copy this again. Let's copy this nav menu, Command C or Control C, and I'll go down into my query and I'll put it here in front of the other nav menu li because it's more general. And I don't need this comment in there. And I'll tab this over. And I'll tab this over. And what we'll try to do first, just put 0 in there and see what happens. See if that wipes it out and lets it align to the left by taking away margin auto and just putting in 0. So that's for the entire nav menu. So I'll hit run, I'll refresh, and let's see what happens at 800 pixels. All right, and that works. That's perfect. Except what's not perfect is we still have the space in here that we need to fix, and we need to do a space above. So let's do that quick, and then I'll take a break and we'll work on the columns. So how are we going to deal with those spaces? Well, remember, we put padding left here at 0 for every line item. And how do we do it for just the first one? Well, we could make a class for that particular line item and then give that space, or we could go in here and do something called first child. Let's see if it comes up. First child, first dash child, and that means the first child in the nav menu list items. So that first child, we'll give that a padding left of 0, and that should be the only one that gets padding left of 0. It should only target that particular one. And while we're at it, what we could also do is for the nav menu, we could do it on this one or we could do it up here. We could do a margin top of 1M to create some space between the company name and our nav menu. So let's see what that does. So what should happen is it keeps the space in here and it takes away the space here because that's the first child of the list items. And that one has 0 padding left. And we also put padding on top above the menu. So now that stays like that the whole way. And what we'll do in the next video, in part 2, is we'll make sure these columns change somewhere around 640, I think. So this is changing up here. This is changing at 800, and that's working fine. And what we'll do is we'll just change this to change at 640. So that means we'll have another query. Instead of being 800, it'll be 640. So again, just to review what happened during that query is the flex within nav, we're changing the flex direction to column and the gap to 0, and that's kind of breaking that side-by-side kind of floating arrangement when it gets to 800 pixels or less. And then the nav menu, what happens to that is it's getting a margin top of 1em, so we have a little separation, and it's getting a margin left of 0, so it no longer has margin left auto, so it's not pushing it to the right, it's going all the way to the left. And then here we're targeting the nav menu list item, the first child, the very first one, and we're saying get rid of the padding on that one, so they still have space in between them. There's still space in between. This has a padding of 2em, this has a padding of 2em, this has a padding of 2em, and this has a padding of 0. And there's our margin top. And we could have used padding top. And that's pretty much taking care of the nav section. We're not doing a hamburger menu or anything right now. We're just doing that. Now in part 2, we're just going to take care of this and just make some adjustments to this one. So this one shouldn't be as difficult as the first one. It shouldn't take as long. So we'll see it for part 2.